Welcome back, everyone. Hope you're doing amazing. We got kings and generals. This is Nicholas II, the most incompetent king ever. Of course, we know who Nicholas II is, somewhat, right? He's the late Tsar. He is the man who, unfortunately, was the last of the kings of Russia, unfortunately, right? You can look at it two different ways. You can feel sorry for him, or you can say, yeah, well, he deserved it. He was more or less in a line of a family which kind of continuously picked up the tab of unrest. And yeah, we'll learn a little bit about that. Also, want to shout out. Look, Kings and General put a little footnote right here. Research written, edited, narrated, illustrated, and animated by humans. Because there's a lot of history content out there right now which is more AI driven, and there's no soul to it. There's no soul to that AI content. And there's a bunch of channels that do faceless YouTube channels and so forth. We don't do that at Kings and Generals. We don't do that at Kings and Generals, what they say. All right, so let's go. Beautiful.
History has its fair share of horrible kings and emperors who...
Yeah, Charles. John. What did John do? I just don't know. This John the First?
were remembered for their lunacy.
Leopold, King Henry the 16th. Well, I don't know what King Henry the 16th really did. He was young. He was kind of young. I don't know what he did besides being a product of his time. Marie Antoinette, we just know about that.
Stupidity or cruelty. The list is very long.
Well, I mean, these three are easy to just throw shade at.
Stretching across time and space, from Emperor Nero to Ivan the Terrible, from Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI to Farouk I of Egypt. While some monarchs are known for their depraved morals, other monarchs are known for their sheer incompetence and complete inability to lead their nations in times of peril.
Real quick, because this is, I mean, we just brought all these people up. I'm going to tell you, I have no idea about Farouk, Focus, Andronicus. Don't know too much about these emperors in Rome, because we're not there yet in my timeline on the Roman history side. Wilhelm II, I feel like he was just too ambitious. That's what we've gathered. Leopold II, don't really know much about him. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, tell me what they did wrong besides being products of their time. Could they have really done anything? Their temperament could have been different, but besides that, could they have done anything? Charles I, Civil War, obviously we already know about him. John, is this John I? What did he do? I know he had, if this is John I, yeah, obviously he had to sign the Magna Carta, and things changed. And of course you have Ivan IV up there. Interesting. Let's get back to the video though.
Such example of a ruler who was completely out of his depth was the last Tsar of the Russians, Nicholas II. Infamous for bringing about the end of Imperial Russia through his sheer ineptitude. The last of the Romanovs, known also as Bloody Nicholas, is considered in some circles to be the most useless head of state who ever ruled.
Do you guys agree?
Today, we will try to answer the question, is Nicholas II the worst monarch in human history?
It's a tall task.
Do you know why thousands of people on YouTube and Patreon support us financially? Because they get history you won't find anywhere else.
W history.
And the North and you love the joint
Conservative and
Thanks for making this possible.
As the son of the conservative and reactionary Russian Emperor Alexander III, Nicholas II had a relatively ordinary childhood and adolescence for a Russian crown prince. He was, of course, homeschooled by some of the brightest minds in Russia, who taught Nicholas in foreign languages, history, literature, military, economics, and religious and political sciences, among other disciplines. There was nothing remarkable about the upbringing of young Nicky, as he was informally known in the family. He studied, hung out with his peers from other royal families, travelled abroad, and led a generally careless life, befitting
Basically a royal.
a child of his high station.
Yeah.
One event, however, likely affected Nicholas's character and worldview significantly.
The assassination of his grandfather?
His grandfather, Tsar Alexander II, was assassinated by members of the anti-monarchist Narodnaya Volya movement during a bombing attack in St. Petersburg on March the 13th, 1881. It should be noted that Alexander II was known as one of the most reformist Tsars in Russian history, and both his son and grandson blamed his death on the fact that he had given so much power to the plebs at the expense of his own absolutism.
That's crazy.
Indeed, all Russian monarchs saw their absolute power as a God-given right, and believed they had been invested with a holy God-given duty to rule the people. Following
Divine Right of Kings playing true there, and it's, you know, it's such a dissonance between the royals and the plebs, because you think you're better than them inherently.
Alexander II's assassination, Nicholas officially became a crown prince. He served a few years in the army and, by all accounts, enjoyed a boisterous life as a Russian officer. However, his father gradually started bringing him into governance and politics to prepare him for his future as the Russian Tsar.
Let's read this. Alexander argued that Nicholas was not mature enough to take on serious responsibilities, having once stated, "Nicky is a good boy, but he has a poet's soul. God help him." Witt stated, who's Witt? Witt stated that if Nicholas was not introduced to state affairs, he would never be ready to understand.
After that, it did not take long for him to become the new Tsar.
Wow.
As in 1894, at the age of 26, he replaced his late father
That's young.
on the throne. Almost immediately upon assuming the throne, Nicholas II showed his true colors when it came to how he intended to rule Russia. It is important to understand that even though the Russian Empire was considered a European superpower, the royal Romanov family had no intention of sharing their power with the Russian people. The Russian Empire did not have a constitution or a parliament. For generations, powerful pro-European liberal circles from within the Russian intelligentsia, military, bourgeoisie and nobility had hoped that every new incoming Tsar would finally agree to liberal reforms. Still, these reforms rarely came and never stuck. Nicholas II was no different. In his first public appearance, he said, "I am aware that recently, in some of the Zemstvo assemblies, voices have been heard of people carried away by senseless dreams of the participation of representatives of the Zemstvos in the internal affairs of the government.
Senseless dreams of representation for you plebs. What a arrogant MF.
Let all know that I shall devote all my strength to the good of the people, but I shall uphold the principle of autocracy just as firmly and unswervingly as did my unforgettable late father." This speech shattered the dreams, or perhaps illusions, of the Russian liberal and progressive circles. One of the leaders of the Cadet Party, Obninsky, would later write that the Tsar's speech marked not only the beginning of a general disillusionment with Nicholas, but also laid the foundation for the future liberation movement, uniting Zemstvo activists and inspiring them with a more resolute course of action.
Makes perfect
While
sense.
the liberal intelligentsia and more politicized minority may have been disillusioned with Nicholas II's speech, he, just like any Tsar, was adored by ordinary Russians and seen almost like a divine figure. Despite this, Nicholas II would see his image of Batyushka Tsar, or Father Tsar, damaged early on in his reign. In May 1896, he and his German-born wife, Alexandra Fyodorovna, were in Moscow for their coronation. To celebrate the occasion, a free feast was organized for the people at the Kodinskoye Pole. Yet soon, the celebration...
we gotta read this. The parties, receptions, and balls after the coronation were darkened by the catastrophe of Kondinka, where 2,000 people were crushed to death. Is that like a crowd crush? The same day as the catastrophe, I was taking a walk along the Kondinka, and I met many groups of people coming back from that site and carrying the Tsar's gifts. The strange thing, though, was that not one person mentioned the catastrophe, and I did not hear about it until the next morning at the Governor General's palace, where General Prefect of Police Volotsky brought a special report. Grand Duke Sergei Alexandrovich was very depressed by what had happened. He gave Velasky orders to return him every hour with detailed reports on the progress of the investigation into causes of the disaster. It was a crowd crush. That's the cause of the disaster. You created a very appetizing offer with no structure to blame yourself.
Turned into a tragedy as the frantic mass of people clamoring for free food turned into a riot, and more than 1,300 people died in the stampede. Nicholas's appearance at a French-hosted ball the next day did not help matters, as the young Tsar was now seen as a ruler who was enjoying himself while his people were suffering.
That's just unfortunate. That's an unfortunate happening, not understanding something like this. Maybe it's not precedented to where you could understand something like that. It's just an unfortunate, and it's probably a pre-scheduled ball. So you can't really hate him too much for the pre-scheduled ball, but the optics don't look good.
The following years of Nicholas II's reign were rather uneventful. Things were quiet at home, with no real change or any indication of the imminence of the revolution. Just like his predecessors, Nicholas II was keen on playing the game of imperialism, being particularly active in expanding Russia's sphere of influence in China and the Far East in general. This put him on a collision course with Japan, and a war between the two nations started in 1904. Overconfident in a victory over what it saw as a backward Asian nation, Russia instead suffered a humiliating defeat. The army of the Tsar lost all the major battles in the war, saw a significant portion of its navy decimated, and suffered a major blow to its economy in the process.
Yeah, I mean, it's so far away from Moscow. Obviously, we know the naval force and how incompetent they were. By the way, they had to travel, basically circumnavigate to get there. And Japan is like probably, we already know about the Japanese history here. They are basically, this after the Meiji Revolution, and they are on the cusp of their imperialistic dreams, and this is just like kindling their fire. It was the worst of worst for them.
The technological
Russia.
inferiority of the Russian Empire, most clearly visible in its logistical challenges, was laid bare in the Russo-Japanese War. At a time when other great powers were industrializing and building their railroad infrastructure rapidly to maximize their economic output and be ready to move their armies quickly in case of war, Russia was still largely an agrarian country.
Wait, they still have no railroads through Siberia. They don't have the Trans-Siberian Railroad yet, do they? I mean, look at Germany. you in Austria, like these places, pretty much every European nation, France, England, they're just rapidly industrialized, and industrialization matters so much more when you have railroads that can deliver, ship, bring in XYZ.
Depending on an incomplete Trans-Siberian railway for logistics. Part of this was simply due to the vastness of Russia, but slow industrialization was also caused by the autocratic nature of the Romanov dynasty, including the reign of Nicholas II, who resisted reforms that could have empowered entrepreneurship due to fears of decentralization and consequent political demands. The humiliating defeat in the Russo-Japanese War and the economic problems caused by it were partially responsible for further tension in the Russian Empire. In late December, workers of St. Petersburg went on a mass strike that paralyzed life in the capital. However, Nicholas II and his government only started to truly lose control following the events which would later be called Bloody Sunday.
The peaceful protest.
January the 22nd, 1905, a huge procession of workers, led by an Orthodox priest named Gapon, began moving towards the imperial residence of the Winter Palace to present their petition asking for political, economic, and educational reforms, including the creation of a parliament. Many demonstrators carried the portraits of Nicholas II, which was an indication of their continued belief in the benevolence of their father Tsar. But their illusions were shattered when imperial troops opened fire on them, killing.
Yeah, and maybe there's some missing context here, but it's the only story I've ever heard. Like, you guys have a different POV where they were difficult, or they were possibly antagonizing the troops or anything. I haven't heard anything of that. It's just literally firing on innocents.
Hundreds of
Horrible.
warriors. This ignited a revolution, with demonstrations,
Stupid, too.
strikes, terror, and ethnic strife spreading throughout the Russian Empire. Attempts to suppress the revolution were in vain, and the bankruptcy of the absolutist Romanov monarchy against the powerful societal forces demanding changes in the Russian Empire was apparent. Unable to suppress the revolution, Nicholas II reluctantly signed the October Manifesto in 1905, granting the constitution and civil rights to the people of the Russian Empire, and promising to hold elections to the legislative body known as the Duma. Until the last moment, Nicholas II was against granting civil and political rights to his subjects, saying, "I cannot squander a legacy that is not mine to squander," in reference to centuries of the absolutist rule by the Romanov dynasty,
It's so much ego involved in this too.
and blaming his prime minister, Witte, for this terrible decision, as described in his diary. However, Nicholas II clearly saw the October Manifesto as a temporary measure to appease the Russian public before he could roll back the promises of reforms. A few months after proclaiming the October Manifesto, he signed the Fundamental Laws in April 1906, which stipulated that the emperor must confirm any laws adopted by the Duma. He then dissolved the First and the Second Dumas, which became the center of opposition against absolutist rule.
Very similar to like the French. Was it Louis Philippe that did that, or was it Charles? One of the two.
He then changed the electoral laws, ensuring a higher degree of loyalty from the Third and Fourth Dumas to the throne. Simultaneously, Tsar Nicholas appointed Pyotr Stolypin as the prime minister. Stolypin, a conservative statesman often compared to Bismarck for his vision and actions, played a key role in suppressing dissent and solidifying the absolutist rule for one last time, but also in enacting many overdue reforms to ease the tensions in the country. Stolypin gained popularity in conservative and moderate circles for his successful reforms. However, instead of relying on Stolypin as a chance to save his absolutist rule from demise, the insecure Nicholas was growing restless with his popular and strong-willed prime minister. The Tsar once wrote in his diary, "Stolypin imagines himself to be indispensable."
So do you.
That said, the biggest cause of tensions between Nicholas II and Stolypin was not purely political. It was about a mysterious and shady man who became a
Rasputin.
spiritual guide and a part-time doctor for the Romanov family. Grigory Yefimovich Rasputin, an ordinary peasant from Tobolsk, Siberia, gained access to the royal family through the combination of masterful manipulation, natural charisma, and an astonishing degree of happenstance. At one point in his life, Rasputin decided to dedicate himself to religion, going on pilgrimages to holy Christian sites in Russia, Greece, and Jerusalem. As a result, he earned a reputation back home in Siberia as both a pious man and a mystic with a healing touch. By the time Rasputin arrived in St. Petersburg in 1903, his aura, as the kids would call it these days,
Hold on. The attitude of Alex and the children to the sinister Gregory, who's Rasputin, whom they consider to be almost a saint when he's in fact only a Keylist. Yes, that's a mystic. Maybe? I don't know what that means. Keylist. He's always there, going into the nursery, visits Olga and Tatiana when they are getting ready for bed, sits there talking to them and caressing them. They are careful to hide him from Sofia Ivanovna, and the children don't dare to talk to her about him. It's all quite unbelievable and beyond understanding. Wait, who is Sofia?
helped Rasputin to secure meetings with Russia's clerical elite. This, in turn, paved the way for the emergence of a close relationship with two Montenegrin princesses living in the Russian court, Milica and Anastasia, who had a very keen interest in religious mysticism. In 1905, Nicholas II and his empress Alexandra Fyodorovna met with Rasputin for the first time when they visited Milica and Anastasia for tea. Both Nicholas and Alexandra were already very religious people, and were apparently impressed by Rasputin's charisma and holiness.
Yeah, their son was sick. So is that Why they met?
However, the illness of the Crown Prince Alexei gave Rasputin an opportunity to gain a true breakthrough in his relationship with the royal family and the Empress. Nicholas's son had been born with hemophilia, a hereditary blood illness which prevents proper blood clotting. This meant that any minor injury to the Crown Prince could...
Tests on the remains of the Romanov imperial family showed that the specific form of hemophilia passed down by Queen Victoria was probably the relatively rare hemophilia B. The presence of hemophilia B within the European royal families is well known with the condition once popularly termed as the royal disease.
...result in excessive bleeding and death. At the time, there was no treatment for hemophilia, and doctors often prescribed aspirin to...
Oh my gosh. A blood thinner for hemophilia. Just take him off the blood thinner. That's what aspirin does.
...any patient with pain and fever. Since aspirin was a blood thinner, the fact that he was more than likely fed it made the Crown Prince's condition worse. In 1907, Alexei was having another hemorrhage, and his doctors were struggling to stop it. Desperate for any help she could get, Empress Alexandra sent a telegram to Rasputin asking for his aid. Rasputin replied, "God has seen your tears and heard your prayers. Do not grieve. The little one will not die." The hemorrhage eventually stopped, but it did so after Rasputin's telegram. The deeply religious Alexandra was convinced that this was a divine intervention brought about by Rasputin's prayers.
Oh my
This
god.
ostensible miracle was Rasputin's ticket into the inner circle of the royal family.
That's crazy.
He became Alexandra Fyodorovna's closest confidant and spiritual guide. In the upcoming years, Alexei
Rasputin used hypnotism and administered herbs in his advice to prevent too much action by the doctors. Too much action by the doctors aided the boy's healing. Some speculated that with the information he got from the confidant at the court, Rasputin timed his interventions for times when Alexei was already recovering.
continued suffering from hemophilia, and now the Empress was listening to Rasputin, not the doctors. Rasputin advised the Empress not to give Alexei any medicine and to rely on prayers and rest instead.
Hey, it's a good idea in that case.
Historians believe that this meant that the Crown Prince stopped taking aspirin, which ultimately helped him. Whatever the case, the Empress believed that Rasputin had a healing hand. Gradually, he gained an outsized influence over Alexandra and indirectly over Nicholas II. Rasputin's reportedly promiscuous character and closeness with the Empress caused scandalous rumors.
Yeah, like what else is he doing?
His rumored influence over political decision-making, which was peddled by the opposition, made matters only worse for Nicholas II. Even other members of the Romanov family, including Nicholas II's mother, Empress Maria Fyodorovna, were deeply troubled by Rasputin's influence and his damage to the prestige of the monarchy. Consequently, they called on the royal couple to send Rasputin away. Despite this, Rasputin remained close to the court, and anyone who opposed him was ostracized from the inner circle.
Wow.
By 1914, Stolypin had been killed, and Rasputin was as influential as ever. But the situation in the Russian Empire seemed stable. However, the outbreak of World War I changed everything. The Austrian Crown Prince Franz Ferdinand was killed. Austria declared war on Serbia, and Russia, the self-proclaimed protector of Slavic and Orthodox nations, decided to intervene. This had a snowball effect, as Europe at the time was entangled in a web of intricate alliance systems, and thus found itself suddenly embroiled in a massive continental war. In hindsight, it would be easy to blame Nicholas II for making this ultimately destructive choice for himself, his family, and Russia, but at that point, public opinion...
It really wouldn't matter, I don't think, who was going to be in charge at that point. World War I was inevitable.
...in Russia was in favor of an intervention, and Russia's pledges to its allies meant that it could not stay out of the war. In fact, Tsar Nicholas even wrote a heartfelt letter to his cousin, the German Kaiser Wilhelm II, to prevent him from entering the war. But it was too little, too late. A dark sense of inevitability gripped Europe, as if the continent itself were sleepwalking towards catastrophe. Each empire bound by pride, fear, and alliance, unable to halt the march to a war everyone foresaw, yet no one could stop. The Great War laid bare all the massive problems Russia had, but had been able to contain and sweep under the rug. Throughout the conflict, Russia struggled against a more technologically advanced German army. The Russian military was in a bad shape and suffered from supply shortages.
I mean, think about that industrialization map that we looked at earlier. That would have definitely helped them.
The empire's inadequate railway network and the ever-present logistics problem of her vast size meant that the humongous Russian army was badly supplied. The home front was in a bad shape too, as supply problems caused food and fuel shortages in cities, including the capital of St. Petersburg. Hunger was creeping in. Accompanied by an absence of decisive victories in the main European theatre, the initially supportive populace gradually became indifferent towards war, or, even worse, hostile.
And all of those revolutions that happened in the 19th century, the ones that almost happened in England, the ones that definitely happened in Italy, Germany, France, Austria, all of these places, it finally caught up to Russia.
To make matters worse, the Russian army suffered a series of defeats throughout the summer of 1915, which would later be known as the Great Retreat. Simultaneously, Alexandra Fyodorovna was getting paranoid about the popularity of the emperor's uncle, Commander-in-Chief Grand Duke Nicholas Nikolaevich, and was convinced that the beloved general was intending to usurp her husband's throne. The empress continuously advised the Tsar
Okay, Alexander's kind of crazy.
to take over the command of the army personally.
Yeah, crazy.
In the end, Nicholas II listened to his wife's advice, despite the fact that his mother, his ministers, and the chairman of the Duma all practically begged him not to do it, understanding that any defeats on the battlefield would now be blamed directly on the Tsar. Nicholas ignored them all, and in August 1915, the Tsar assumed the role of the commander-in-chief of the Russian army. In hindsight, this was arguably one of the most significant steps that eventually led to the downfall of the Romanov dynasty. The emperor started spending most of his days in the
That guy's tall.
Stavka, the headquarters of the army in Mogilev, personally taking part in the planning of the war. During this time, the Russian army carried out the Brusilov offensive, its biggest breakthrough in World War I, but this could not reverse the overall trend. The Russian army
The Russo offensive is considered one of the most lethal offensives in world history. Russian casualties were considered around 800,000. Austria-Hungarian losses 616,000.
was suffering from massive losses. It had the largest absolute number and the highest ratio of soldiers surrendering in World War I.
It's crazy.
And desertion and mutinies were becoming very common. The discontent at home grew due to a very poor economic situation and supply shortages. Worker strikes in vital plants and factories had a further paralyzing effect on manufacturing and political stability. At this point, Nicholas II was practically uninvolved in civilian matters, leaving the unpopular empress as the de facto leader of Russia, with Rasputin as her closest advisor. The deterioration of the situation on the battlefield and at home, Alexandra Fyodorovna's German origins, and Rasputin's known opposition to the war proliferated rumors that they were German spies among the Russian public. The political situation was very unstable, as exemplified by the fact
It doesn't help that Nicholas's cousin is the German Kaiser.
that Nicholas II changed his prime minister 4 times during 1916. The majority of the previously loyal Duma united in a progressive bloc in 1915, demanding a representative government. But this would have meant giving up some of the power, which was unacceptable for Nicholas II, an absolutist to his core. By doing this, the Tsar squandered perhaps the last chance at a peaceful change in the Russian Empire. All this unrest eventually snowballed into a revolution, which was much more powerful than the 1905 revolution and carried out against a much weaker regime. Soldiers and the police loyal to the monarchy tried to suppress the growing revolutionary movement, but the situation was getting out of control. Military units abandoned Nicholas II and switched sides in favor of the revolutionaries. The Duma leadership made several attempts to ask Nicholas II to accept a new government responsible for the Duma, which the Tsar, of course, rejected because of absolutism, traditions, and his duty to the Russian people bestowed upon him by God. An attempt to suppress the mutiny by soldiers sent from the World War I fronts did not amount to anything. At this point, Russia's military high command also understood the gravity of the situation, calling upon Nicholas II to abdicate to save the country. Without any allies left, Nicholas II signed an abdication, not just for himself, but also...
He should have signed an abdication in absentee, because he should have went to London a long time ago.
Also for his son, on March the 2nd, 1917. He named his brother, Grand Duke Michael, his successor, but the latter refused the crown. The February Revolution had won. The power was now in the hands of the provisional government. The Romanov dynasty, which had reigned over Russia for more than 300 years, had fallen.
Just like
A
that.
year later, Nicholas II, his wife, and their children were executed by the Bolsheviks in Yekaterinburg. So, was Nicholas II the worst monarch in history? There were certainly kings
I don't know.
to have killed more people, as well as rulers who may have been more oppressive towards their subjects or ruled more incompetently. So it is difficult to grant Nicholas II this questionable honor of naming him the worst monarch ever, but he is certainly up there in the conversation. Nicholas II found himself completely out of his depth, facing challenges of historical proportions. His stubbornness and inability to properly grasp the processes going on in Russia ultimately led to his and his family's demise. Perhaps, had he been more pragmatic and less conservative in his blind stubbornness to insist on absolutist rule, his dynasty could have been saved. Had he followed the advice
Maybe.
of smart people around him, he would not have allowed questionable characters such as Rasputin hanging around the court and damaging the reputation of the royal family. Nicholas II's reign is a story of a succession of wrong and disastrous decisions,
Crazy.
each worse than the previous, which had an impact big and small on the Russian Empire, ultimately accumulating into a revolution, the fall of the Russian Empire, and a bloody civil war. While his score sheet at the end of his reign may not make him the worst monarch in all of history, it certainly puts him up there in the top percentile.
He's in the top
We
10.
hope you enjoyed this video.
He's in the top 10 for sure. I'll get to something. Look, we'll stop right here. So is he the worst monarch of all time? I don't have enough data to say yes or no. I don't have the other. I would say he's top 10, just assuming. But I don't. There was a lot of other interesting characters that were on the score sheet up front, like all these individuals. I don't know. What I do know is the Romanovs or the absolutists of the 18th century into the 20th century kind of propelled this situation to happen. World War I was gonna happen. You were gonna be logistically sound anyway. You were gonna have industrialization anyway. It wouldn't really have mattered who it was on that spot. Germany was gonna overwhelm you. Austria and Germany collectively were gonna overwhelm you. There's no way you would have had the foresight to prepare for that. I just don't think so. I mean, there's a lot more World War I experts out there than me, but I just don't think Russia could have saved face. They had to sue for peace, or they could have abandoned their Serbs. They could have either abandoned their Serbs and been neutral somehow, some way. Don't know how that would have happened, but maybe somehow, some way they became neutral. Or they could have sued for peace after they were losing so much instead of firing his uncle. Those are the only, I don't know, how else? But then all the internal strife, whether it be the funny stuff of Rasputin or the Bloody Sunday or the optics of how he lived his life and all the suffering and famine and so forth. Some of this stuff, I just don't see how you get around. So is there a situation or a scenario where, the monarch survives another 40, 50 years and then they create a system like England has? Yeah, there actually is. I could see that. But World War I, you can't participate in it. You cannot participate in World War I. You have to figure out that. But then World War II comes around. I don't know. It's hard to imagine. It's really hard to. Would World War II even happen? Would it even happen? I don't know, because then Germany. I don't know, man. Ooh, I don't know. That's a hypothetical. Let me know what you guys think. I don't think he's probably the worst of all time, just because, I mean, we are including 3 Roman emperors right there. Caligula's pretty bad. Caligula's pretty bad. I guess the whole body of work of incompetence and evil, I don't know. There's a lot of incompetence out there. Incompetence is pretty bad, but evil and incompetent is worse than anything. Appreciate you guys as always. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Peace out and bye-bye.